The 320-pound man's face went completely still. Not angry, not threatening anymore, just frozen, the kind of stillness that hits a person the moment they realize they've fundamentally misread a situation. Around them, the prison weight room had gone dead silent. 12 inmates who'd been lifting, talking, going about their business. All of them stopped, all of them looking. Because what Mike Tyson had just said, 4 quiet words, no aggression, no raised voice, no clenched fists, had just dismantled everything that man thought he understood about power. What Mike said in that moment would spread through every cell block in that facility within 24 hours. Guards would repeat it to each other at shift change. Inmates who weren't even there would swear they witnessed it firsthand. And it would be retold for years, not because of any punch, not because of any fight, but because of the choice Mike made when he had every reason in the world to do something else entirely. Now, to understand how the first week of Mike Tyson's prison sentence produced a moment nobody saw coming, we need to go back to the very beginning. It was late March 1992. Mike had been inside the Indiana Youth Center for 6 days. 6 days that felt like 6 months. The intake process was behind him, the strip searches, the psychological evaluations, the paperwork that reduced a human being to a number. He'd been assigned to cell block D, had met his cellmate, had learned the basic geography of the facility. Where to eat, where to walk, where not to walk. He was beginning to understand the architecture of this place, not just the physical layout but the invisible one. The one built from reputation, hierarchy, and fear. Mike had kept to himself almost entirely. That had been a conscious decision. He'd grown up in Brownsville, spent time in juvenile detention before Cus D'Amato found him and changed everything. He understood from childhood that the most dangerous mistake you could make in a new environment was acting before you'd finished observing. So he observed. He listened. He mapped everything. What he'd mapped so far was this. The facility had several power centers, several men who ran different operations, different sections. Most of them had given Mike a wide berth, not out of respect exactly, but out of calculation. Mike Tyson was famous. Touching him carried risk. The guards watched him more carefully than other inmates. Causing him visible problems might draw attention nobody wanted. But there was one man who operated differently. His name was Victor Reese, though nobody called him that. Everyone called him Ox. Ox had been inside for 11 years. Armed robbery, aggravated assault, and a second charge that added a decade to his sentence. He was 41 years old, stood 62, and weighed somewhere around 320 pounds. Not the bloated 320 of someone who'd let themselves go, but the dense, compressed 320 of a man who'd spent 11 years with nothing to do but lift weights and consolidate power. He ran the weight room. That was his domain, his throne room, the place where he held court and conducted the business that kept his operation running. Contraband moved through the weight room. Debts were settled there. Alliances were formed there. If you wanted to use the equipment, and using the equipment meant having something to do, having an outlet, maintaining your body and your sanity, you acknowledged Ox's authority. That was the unspoken arrangement. Mike had been using the weight room for 3 days. He'd come in, work out, speak to no one, leave. Nobody had bothered him. He'd assumed, perhaps, that the same calculation everyone else seemed to be making, that touching Mike Tyson was more trouble than it was worth, applied to Ox as well. He was wrong. On the morning of his 6th day, Mike came into the weight room at his usual time. A few inmates were already there. He nodded to the ones he'd seen before, found an open bench, started warming up. He'd been working for maybe 15 minutes when he felt it. That specific pressure of being watched, not glanced at, watched, studied. He didn't look up immediately. Instead, he kept his rhythm, kept his breathing even, and used his peripheral vision to locate the source. Ox was sitting on a bench across the room, elbows on his knees, hands clasped, watching Mike with an expression that was completely unreadable. His crew, 4 men who were always nearby stood behind him at varying distances, waiting. After another minute, Ox stood up. The room shifted. The other inmates who'd been going about their routines found reasons to slow down, to reposition themselves. Everyone wanted to see this without looking like they were trying to see it. Ox crossed the room slowly, his movements unhurried. He stopped about 4 feet from Mike's bench, close enough to make the point, far enough to not technically be in Mike's face. Mike set down the weight he was working with, looked up. "You're Mike Tyson," Ox said. His voice was flat, conversational, not a question. "Yeah," Mike said. Ox nodded slowly. "I heard you were here, heard you were keeping quiet, staying out of things." He paused. "That's smart. First week, new environment, you watch before you move, I respect that." Mike said nothing. He could feel where this was going, but he'd learned enough about situations like this to know that speaking too early, filling silence that wasn't yours to fill, was how you gave away information. "Here's the thing," Ox continued, his voice still measured, still conversational. "Everyone in this facility has a function. Some guys cook, some guys clean, some guys move product, some guys provide protection." He spread his hand slightly, a gesture of simple economics. "Everyone contributes, that's how this works. That's how it's worked for 11 years. He looked at Mike with something that might have been patience. "You've got value I haven't seen in a long time. Name recognition, influence. Other inmates pay attention when you move through a room. Guards watch you, which means when you're nearby, certain conversations don't happen that otherwise would." He paused again. "I can use that, which means you work for me now. Simple arrangement. You do your time, you stay safe, and you contribute to something that functions." The weight room was absolutely quiet. 12 men, all of them attending very carefully to something that was not their business. Mike looked at Ox for a long moment. He took stock of the man, the size of him, the settled confidence of someone who'd been in control of something for a long time, the way his crew had positioned themselves in the room without appearing to position themselves. This wasn't someone who relied on anger. This was someone who relied on structure, on the simple weight of inevitability. His offer wasn't delivered as a threat because, in his mind, it didn't need to be. It was just the way things were. Mike understood the calculation. He'd seen versions of it his whole life. Someone builds something, defends it, and then presents their power not as violence but as reality. Joining isn't submission, it's just acknowledging what exists. He'd seen Cuss dismantle that logic with a single question once, talking about someone who tried to intimidate one of his fighters years before Mike's time. "Ask them what they actually need," Cuss had said. "Not what they want. What they need. Because what people want and what they need are almost never the same thing. And when you understand what they need, you understand how much of what they're asking for is theater." Mike looked at Ox. "Can I ask you something?" Mike said. His voice was quiet, calm, not challenging. Ox blinked slightly. The question was unexpected. "Go ahead." 11 years, Mike said. "You've been running things here for 11 years. You got a system that works. You've kept it working through probably 10, 15 different wardens, hundreds of inmates coming and going, whatever they throw at you." He paused. "You don't need me for any of that. You were doing fine before I got here. You'll be doing fine after I leave." Ox's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted almost imperceptibly. He was listening. "So what you actually need," Mike continued, "isn't for me to work for you. What you need is to know that I'm not going to become a problem, that I'm not going to try to build something that cuts into what you have, that I'm not going to be some kind of rallying point for guys who want to challenge your operation." He let that land for a second. "That's it. That's the real question. And the answer is no. I'm not here for any of that. I have 3 years minimum left to serve. I want to read, train, think, and get out. Nothing I want requires me to take a single thing from you." The weight room was so quiet Mike could hear the ventilation system. Ox stared at him. 10 seconds passed, 15. Then Ox said, with genuine curiosity rather than aggression, "You're not scared." "I'm not stupid," Mike said. "There's a difference." Before we continue, drop your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have said in Mike's position? Now, back to the story. Another silence. Then something happened that no one in that weight room had seen happen with Ox in 11 years. He smiled. Not a power play smile. Not the smile of someone who's about to make a move. A real one, brief and slightly reluctant. The smile of a man who's just encountered something that surprised him genuinely. "You talk like a lawyer," Ox said. "I talk like someone who grew up having to be smarter than the situation," Mike said. Ox was quiet for another moment. Then he turned to his crew with a look that said nothing needed to be said. He turned back to Mike. "You're right," Ox said simply. "That's exactly what I needed to know." He picked up a weight bar from the rack nearby, sat back down on his bench, and went back to his workout. The weight room exhaled. Inmates who'd been frozen slowly resumed what they'd been doing. The volume of the room came back gradually. The clank of iron, the low murmur of conversation, the ordinary sounds of men passing time. Mike picked up his weight and went back to work. Later that afternoon, Carlos, his cellmate, heard about what happened from 3 different people before Mike even returned to the cell. "They're saying you talked Ox down," Carlos said when Mike walked in. "Nothing to talk down," Mike said. "He asked a question, I answered it." Carlos shook his head slowly. "You know what people are saying. They're saying you're the first person in years who said no to Ox without it turning into something." Mike was quiet for a moment. "I didn't say no to him. I told him what he actually needed to hear. Those aren't the same thing." Carlos thought about that for a long time. In the days that followed, the story spread the way stories spread in closed environments, fast, distorted in some details, but accurate in its core. By the end of the week, every inmate in cell block D had heard a version of it. By the end of the following week, it had reached other cell blocks. The version most people heard wasn't entirely accurate. Some had Mike delivering some kind of devastating verbal takedown. Others had Ox backing away, visibly shaken. A few versions had other people involved. But the inmates who were actually in that weight room, they knew the real story. And they told it the way it actually happened, because the truth was more interesting than any exaggeration. Mike Tyson, 6 days into a prison sentence, had looked at the most powerful man in the facility and instead of fighting or folding, had simply identified what that man actually needed and given it to him in 4 sentences. Ox, for his part, never approached Mike again, not because he was afraid, because the question had been answered, the uncertainty resolved, and Ox was, above everything else, a practical man. He had no interest in problems that weren't problems. Mike moved through the facility after that with something that was difficult to define but easy to feel. Not protection exactly, not alliance, more like a settled acknowledgement, a collective understanding that this particular man operated by rules that didn't require anyone else's permission. Cuss had told him once that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one who's willing to fight. It's the one who's already decided whether or not they will, and either way is completely at peace with that decision. Mike Tyson spent his first week in prison the way he would spend the next several years, watching, thinking, and understanding that the greatest fights are the ones that never happen because one person had the clarity to change the terms before things reached that point. That morning in the weight room, a 320-pound man told Mike Tyson he worked for him now. Mike Tyson's response wasn't defiance, it wasn't submission, it was something rarer than both. It was understanding. 4 sentences, no raised voice, no fists. And it became legend.